Morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Levy, the CEO of the Prosserman JCC and Schwartz Reisman Center in Toronto, and I just learned a really hard lesson that if you do not send JCCA a picture, they will find something on the internet and put it up on the screen behind you. Now, for context, that kid is now about 5'11" and 15 years old, so if you are a new exec and you have a bar or bat mitzvah picture on the internet, I would take it down because you'll be in a position where that will be your profile picture. So I've been given this detailed minute-by-minute script, but I'm going to go off script for a minute. I learned a long time ago that there's a value of asking for forgiveness instead of permission. So I just want to take a moment. I was so inspired yesterday by Michael, Scott, and Joel, and I just want to take a second to express my extreme gratitude to both Saul and Lynn for their leadership in our field. When I started as a CEO around that time, 13 years ago, it was Saul that at my first professional conference really made me feel comfortable and quickly helped me understand and appreciate the true power and potential of our work. And then when I joined the JCC Association Board, I got to work closely with Lynn, and I witnessed firsthand how you can both focus locally and continentally and truly be a leader to help advance our mission. So you're both a reflection of the passion, the knowledge, and dedication in this room, and we are reminded by you that just with a little bit of kindness, we can do incredible things as we build communities. So you're an inspiration, and I hope you enjoy your retirement, and I think you can feel immense pride when you look around the room at the future of our movement. So I just wanted to take a moment to address that. And now I'm down to 3 minutes and 55 seconds, so I'll speak quickly. Speaking of inspiration, this morning is our first Inspire session, and we've assembled a very talented panel to help us explore the staffing challenge that as leaders in our movement, we need to navigate along with the rest of the leaders in the world. We heard yesterday from Ron Clark. Ron talked about the importance of his team and people in delivering his mission. And today we're going to just bring it home for you a little bit and apply it to our work at the JCCs. So I was told that I would be inviting them up to the stage, but it looks like they're already here. So let me start by introducing to my left, Betzy Lynch, the CEO of the Lawrence Family JCC on the Jacobs Family campus in San Diego, California. Betsy's a colleague, a friend, and she's going to moderate the conversation with our three special guests, each of whom is a leader with insights, data, wisdom about the trends and challenges and opportunity facing every workforce. Next to Betzy is Rob Carter. Rob is a talent acquisition leader for the Coca-Cola Company. The JCC movement is proud of our 34-year partnership with the Coca-Cola Company, a longtime and proud sponsor of the JCC Maccabi Games and the largest corporate continental sponsor of the JCC movement. Based here in Atlanta, Rob Carter is honoring us today with his time and presence, and among Rob's many passions at Coca-Cola, Salesforce, and Deloitte is a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. He has a proven track record of driving innovation through programs and processes to attract and hire diverse talent. Joining Rob at the table over here to my right from Coca-Cola, you'll find Alba Balin, the VP Community and Stakeholder Management, and Travis Burgeon, Director of Community Marketing, both of whom lead JCC Association's partnerships. So welcome. Next to Rob is Gali Cooks. Gali is a dear friend and partner of the JCC movement. Among her many accomplishments, she's the CEO, by the way, and founder of Leading Edge. And if you are not participating in Leading Edge as a JCC, I highly encourage you to do so. It's a game changer. Among her many accomplishments, Leading Edge has conducted 7 annual Leading Places to Work surveys of the Jewish community field, gathering input from 45,000 employees in nearly 400 Jewish organizations, including 46 JCCs in 2022. So, Gali Cooks, everyone. And next to Gali is Dave Toplinski, Dave is the Senior Director of Talent Solutions at LinkedIn. in Chicago, Illinois, and for more than a decade has been integral to growing LinkedIn from a startup to the first place we look when thinking about trends in the labor market. LinkedIn is the destination for billions of data points collected through the most essential connection platform for all workforces. Dave knows a lot about our movement. He's a board member of the JCC in Chicago, former camper, song leader. We're going to get to that, I promise you, in the Q&A, and a staff member of JCC of Chicago's Camp Chai. So, Dave Toplinski. And with 11 seconds to go, I will turn it over to Betzy to kick off the conversation.
Thank you for the 7 seconds. I appreciate it. So apparently in order to talk about talent, you had to have a Southern accent to come here. So that's, I think, why they invited me, even though I'm in San Diego. Thank you to my Birmingham and Memphis peeps, because this is where the Southern accent comes from. I want to thank everyone who is joining us on our panel today and to talk a little bit about the format. We are going to prompt some questions, have a conversation amongst us for about 30 minutes. Then all of you will have an opportunity to spend some time unpacking what we've discussed, and then prompt some questions back to us to then answer as we go. Please make sure that your questions are appropriate. Is Jared Powers in the room? Jared, please, appropriate questions. Thank you very much. And I am looking forward to this conversation, as we've already recognized that staffing and recruiting and retention and engagement of our staff teams has been a critical issue in us, well, I guess keeping us up at night to keep on theme. And with that said, we are at a moment where the labor market continues to be incredibly dynamic, probably more dynamic than any other time in most of our careers. There's a lot to be learned from best practice from amazing people here, and we're going to dive into listening and hearing from them. So we're going to start in the Jewish space first and hear from Gali related to the trends and the things that she's seeing across the Jewish community sector.
Awesome. Thank you, Betzy, and good morning, everybody. And thank you for this wonderful opportunity to be here and learn from wonderful colleagues. I wanted to first lay the land, which is why I took notes, so that we can have a bit of a sense of the Jewish nonprofit sector, the different contours of our talent market, where we're doing well, where we are not doing as well. There are growth areas, as my team likes to say, as opposed to weaknesses. Always have appreciative inquiry. And so wanted to lay out that, and then also show a little bit about what we found in the 2022 Employee Experience Survey, just to give a little bit of a sense of really the talent inflows and outflows within the Jewish nonprofit sector. So a little bit of numbers, and then we'll get into some of the nuance and the stories. Overall, the Jewish nonprofit sector in North America, we believe, has about 10,000 Jewish organizations. That is a number that we are hoping to look into this year, actually, because that number is about 10 years old. So take that with an asterisk. In that, there are anywhere between 80,000 to 100,000 people working in our organizations full-time. So these are full-time employees, and as Daron mentioned last night in his address, we know that our sector, in terms of seasons, can definitely shrink or expand in that. Now, what we are seeing in terms of our sector is that there are also about, in the last, really the last 2 years has been not only a shrinking of about 20% of our workforce, but also tremendous churn. So one of the things that we've all read about is the Great Resignation, the Great Reshuffling, the Great whatever. There has been a tremendous amount of churn within the Jewish nonprofit sector, so much so that a full third of employees working in our sector are new as of 2 years ago. So they've spent 2 years or less here. Also, about 40% have been promoted in the last 2 years. So it makes a lot of sense. Also, for our work, we ask questions like, how are these folks being onboarded? How are they being supported? A lot of them are first-time managers, and we know the answers to that, especially because one of the questions in our survey is all about, do you have enough people to get the work done? And the answer is no. That is generally not being done. So that gives you a little bit of a space. In terms of demographics, we know that we are overwhelmingly a workforce made up of women. So female-identified individual, that's 70%. About 25% identify as men, and then there's 5% that don't want to identify and also are gender fluid. So it's really interesting. When we get to the CEO role or executive director role, what we've seen over the years as we've been doing this experience survey is that there has been actually a shrinking of the gap between the genders, between men and women leading CEOs. However, the largest organizations are still overwhelmingly led by men. So what we have is we have a sector made up of women that's really led by men. And that's been really interesting to see also as we think of pipeline and what are the ways in which we are enabling our people to maximize their potential and grow into their roles and possibly seniority. So that gives you a sense a little bit. Also in terms of demographic, we are overwhelmingly white. We're about 70% white. Now I will say the JCC movement is a little bit more diverse from that perspective, but only a little bit, about 2/3 identify as white. We also, in terms of the Jewish nonprofit sector, one of the things that I'm always interested in looking at is we're actually not as Jewish as we thought. So our sector overall, and this is last year, 12,000 employees, 4,000 of which were JCCs, so thank you for that. 40% identify as non-Jewish, 60% identify as Jewish. 60% Jewish. Now within the JCC movement, that ratio is flipped. So 60% non-Jewish and 40% Jewish. So think about what that means in terms of recruitment, retention, onboarding, the different ways in which we enable people to come into our culture, workplace culture, and in many ways, other ways of enabling them to maximize their potential. Now, in terms of the engagement survey, with some good news and some bad news. And the bad news is always the same bad news. So hopefully we'll be able to shift some of that. The good news is, and this has been from day one, our employees are incredibly motivated by our mission. They feel immense pride, and they know how their role actually advances the mission. That last one is magic. It's unbelievable. It's every year when we look at our survey results, our organizational development psychologists are like, we're not sure how you all do this, but the aquatics director at the JCC of Fill in the Blanks knows exactly how this person is actually motivating the mission. That's extraordinary. That's a testament to the leadership in this room and the leadership of the Jewish community. On the other side, we have some, in some ways, basic hygiene factors, honestly, that we're not doing well and we can certainly do well. And then there are other ways in which the ways in which we've had different leadership manifest in our organizations are really standing in our way. So what we see within organizations, there are engagement drivers and recruitment drivers. These are basically the drivers that enable people to do their best work. That's engagement. And retention is, I'm going to stay here, intent to stay. What we see in our organization is that leaders don't communicate enough, transparently enough, or in a two-way or multi-way within our organizations, and that's demoralizing, mystifying, and sometimes neglecting our employees. And they're voting with their feet. A lot of them are saying, you know what, no, I don't feel that this place is motivating me to do my best work. I'm not sure why this is happening, and I read about it in a newspaper, you know the stories. So when it comes to communication, and then that actually filters into confidence in leadership. That's the other factor where our employees are saying, I'm not sure if I have confidence in leadership. And the best way to actually, bridge that chasm, if we look at the engagement survey results of an organization and we see confidence in leadership is lacking, communication has been shown, literally from a data perspective, to close that chasm very, very aggressively. So communicate. We just don't do that. We're honestly too busy, too tired, the synapses are kind of well worn, and the world of work has completely changed. We are now 5 generations in the workplace. There are very different expectations of work. Gen Z and millennials are mysterious. No, just kidding. They're amazing, and in many ways, they have a different relationship with work. And also, I will say this is good news, because so many of them really want to choose meaning over money. So when we get to that salary question, which I know will come up, that is not the panacea. It really, really isn't, and we've got data to show and all that. It is super important. If you don't do it, it's the kind of thing that's going to just lessen the dissatisfaction and make your life miserable. But it's the kind of thing that is not the reason necessarily that some of the generations and some of the highest people are either going to come to work for us or leave. So I can go on, but I won't.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. So for those of you that don't know me, I listen to all of my podcast books at 2 times the speed at least. So when they said we could talk about all of this in 30 minutes, I was like, no problem. But I guess in real life, everything's a little bit slower, so we got to pick it up. Okay, Dave, based on what Gali has shared about the Jewish sector, share how that translates to what you're seeing in overall workforce trends, particularly related to recruitment.
Yeah, happy to chime in. It's not so different in the corporate sector. Like everything that Gali's saying is dead on. First of all, I want to share some gratitude and say thank you. I think you all have probably the hardest job in the world, which is why I left 17 years ago. I also want to say thank you. As a consumer of your product. I realize my generation is the generation causing so much pain in this room right now, and I apologize on behalf of all of us. We are big fans of the product, and we love what the JCC has to offer. With that said, let me help get all of us grounded a little bit in the world of LinkedIn. So you're probably all familiar with LinkedIn. We are, for all intents and purposes, a consumer-facing website, one of the most popular websites in the world, and the #1 destination where professionals go digitally in the world. So when you think about where professionals hang out, they hang out on LinkedIn. When all is said and done, in its simplest form, we are the holders of the world's most accurate professional data. Billions of times a day, we are collecting data points from different things that happen on LinkedIn. Someone updates their job title, someone joins a new company, somebody posts something on LinkedIn, and we collect this, and we're able to understand what's going on in the labor market. We're able to get a sneak peek into what happened, what's happening now, and what's coming. And so just to get grounded a little bit in the current state of affairs, as Gali mentioned, it's been a very dynamic time, the most dynamic. We are just coming off of what has been the most intense, when we think about the pendulum, the most intense employee-driven market we've ever seen, meaning that employees hold all the power. We've seen the headlines. Our data showing this too. The pendulum is starting to swing a little bit more towards an employer-driven market, mostly driven by fears of a recession. And what our data is showing is that that's likely coming mildly and going to happen over the next 9 to 12 months. When we look at COVID, peak unemployment was around 15%. When you look at 2009, it was around 9 or 10%. Our data now is showing that over the course of the next year or so, that's going to peak out at about 5%. Why that's important is because as the pendulum swings, I also call it the gratitude pendulum. The employee-driven market, the gratitude looks a lot like F this place, I'm out of here. The employer-driven market looks a lot like I am so grateful to have this job. Thank you. And so the power is starting to shift quite a bit. And we don't think it's going to swing in the extremes that it swung on the employee-driven market side, but it is starting to even out a little bit. When we look at hiring today over the past year, 1 year ago, again, was the most intense time we've ever seen of people leaving jobs, taking new jobs, attriting. That has completely leveled off now. There are about as many open jobs out there as there are people looking for jobs, which is a pretty healthy place to be. Plenty more to share, but just wanted to get everyone grounded.
Okay, so I just want to say that when I have my regular work day, I start somewhere in the F this place. I can't wait to leave, and boy, am I grateful to have that job, and that all happens in less than 24 hours. Rob, sorry, David Wax, Gary Jacobs, if this is being recorded, I apologize. I never think that. Okay, Rob, let's drill down specifically to Coca-Cola and really think about what you've heard from both Gali and from Dave and how that translates into what you're seeing, and the specificity of the diversity of the types of employment in Coca-Cola, how you have taken all your experience from all over the places you've been and translate that into systems and process and meaning in the recruitment space of Coke.
Sure. So let me start also by adding my thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. Certainly much gratitude for the opportunity to spend some time with you. Coke is not too very much different than what you've heard on the stage. I was nodding emphatically because some of the challenges that are mentioned are very much in line with what we're experiencing as well. If I think about some of our challenges out the gate, we think about labor shortages specifically for hourly, for manufacturing, for trade groups. If we think about tech companies coming from Silicon Valley all the way east and driving up price points for specialized workers, and how do you compete with that? All of those challenges exist for us as well. And there was no rule book that was given or no instruction manual that came out and said, hey, we're dealing with this COVID thing, here you go, here's how to do it. And so Coke has been very good about, intentional about thinking through this. And some of the thoughts that I had around maybe just how we've addressed in thinking about this, both for hourly workers, for manufacturing, for our corporate folks, things like flexibility, having to think through how our workers work. You know, we can't have those in a syrup plant working from home. They have to show up. But for those who are working in the office, how do we bring them together? What tools, what resources do they need? We believe that the magic happens at Coke when folks come together. And so how do you keep that going with someone working from home? We know that with the great reshuffling, if you will, folks were leaving jobs because they wanted to do something different. They weren't advancing as quickly as they wanted to. There were plenty of opportunities out there that seemed more appealing. How do you address that, right? And one of the ways I think that we've done that very well is internal mobility, thinking about assignments internally and giving people the opportunity to have short-term assignments and trying something on for 90 days to see if it sticks. And if it does, great, we can work it out. And if it doesn't, you can go back to your job and do what you were doing. Leading with empathy. One of the things that I've heard everywhere I've gone thus far is centered around culture. And if you know anything about Coke, our culture is really unique. And there's a lot of stickiness with regard to tenure. You have folks that have been there for 25 years and folks that have been there for 9 months, like me. And what's really cool about that is you have folks that want to be there and are very much committed. What's very interesting about what we've seen in the marketplace relative to the various generations that are working, 5 generations working together now, is there's this focus now on making sure that you feel more connected to the mission or to what the organization is doing. So yes, compensation and what you're going to make is largely important, but if you don't feel connectivity to the heart of the organization, chances are this is going to be your out. And so the other thing that's been relatively unique is just the doubling down on our value proposition. Coke's mission is to refresh the world and make a difference. You might look at that and say, that's Coke marketing, you guys are good at that, but you can sink your teeth into that if you're looking for something to believe in, and therefore maybe forcing your hand a little bit to want to stick with it because you can see how that works for you. So a combination of those things I think have helped us to kind of keep things moving with those existing challenges and still trying to work through it and figure out as the market continues to change, as employees or consumers' demands start to change as well, and how do we respond to that?
Thank you so much. I wanted for us just to unpack many of the things that you've already touched upon. And I want to stick in the recruitment space for just a minute because I think this is one of the largest challenges. I know for some of what we are challenged with, on one hand, we do have the benefit of being for-purpose organizations. I prefer to call us for-purpose instead of nonprofit because we need to make some money. And so people in their quest over their life discoveries when they stayed home for a long time decided that they would like to do work that is purposeful. How have you felt that companies that have purpose first have been successful in messaging that in a different way? And then I'd also love to unpack the nature of having somebody, I think you said in the syrup factory, as opposed to somebody working at home, because having a virtual lifeguard or a virtual preschool teacher, it would be frowned upon. And so we deal with the unfairness of the fact that the luxury, as it were, of having that work from home flexibility is a challenge in our space. So I'd like to hear talk amongst yourselves.
Cool. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. I have like some really interesting data points here, and then we'll unpack them. Yell it out. Give me a guess. Pre-pandemic, normal times, what percentage of jobs do you think were work from home jobs? 5, that's right. All right, peak pandemic. We are at the peak of it. What percentage of jobs do you think were work from home jobs? 20%. 20%. And now we have leveled off at a healthy 15% for about a year now. So 15% of our jobs on our platform, which covers most of the world's jobs, 15% are work from home jobs. When we break out the nonprofit sector, that number went from pre-pandemic from 5% to today, 6%. Which makes sense. We are running community centers. People have to come in. This is the wild part. Of the 15% of those jobs on LinkedIn, they make up 52% of all applications. Of the 15% of jobs that are work from home on LinkedIn, they make up 52% of the job applications. That could sound really daunting right now. Let me drill down a little further though. This is not binary. It's not work from home or work from the office. What that is signaling, like when we drill down to that and we survey our members and so on and so forth, what we are actually hearing is that people want flexibility, and they want more than flexibility, transparency into what flexibility and hybrid looks like. Every company right now out there is saying like, we are a hybrid workforce, or we have flexibility, or we are work from home, or we are work from office, and nobody is getting to the detail about what that actually means. And so it's driving fear unless you are explicit about we are work from home. All people are looking for is definition around what flexibility means at your organization, at your employer. And so what I would think through as a head of a JCC is truly defining that and speaking about that and making sure that my employees all understand that, and that is the word that we are bringing to the street as well in terms of when we are recruiting, when we're talking to talent, what does flexibility look like at the JCC? Because that is the number 3 thing, according to our data, flexibility, that employees value right now. Number 3 on the list is flexibility, where and how and when we're working.
And the only thing I'd add to that is just, do so unapologetically. I think we're on calls talking to people and screening them and almost apologizing for the fact that we need you to come into the office. And then on top of that, making sure that you and everyone in the organization is clear on what that means and the benefits of having that sort of come together and what that means for the organization. There's great synergy that happens when we're together. And quite frankly, not everyone wants to work from home. And so thinking about it differently as opposed to maybe jumping into this fear tactic of we're all doing this and the world's falling apart and all of these things. I think there are changes that are happening where folks are, coming to realize that everyone's not going to be able to work from home, and guess what? That's okay. And I think just being upfront, being transparent about it, and making sure that people understand that has served us well fairly recently.
I just want to echo that. So that I love those stats because that absolutely tracks with what we found. We found that 75% of employees actually work full-time from their actual, consistent office space, and then like 10% more have some sort of hybrid situation, and then at some point, this was March of 2022, so the world has still changed. There were a lot fewer that were fully remote. And we know also that there's a lot of research. I think there was just a New York Times article, in fact, an interview with Cal Newport, who was saying, the digital kind of, fully remote sort of workplace is kind of making people depressed. And so there are ways in which, from a pendulum, like we were all home and maybe only 20% of us were home. This is crazy. During the height of the pandemic, but there is a hunger to connect with folks that we're seeing. We also see a generational shift, like really, like certainly the folks who've come out of school, they want to connect. This is like, the social outlet, their opportunity to learn from mentors, to really like get in there and see what a job is. A lot of them are hungry for that. And then really it's the flexibility and transparency, which folks have really told us is really about trust. Are you going to trust me that I'm going to come into work, do what you set out to do, and then when things need to change, let's have a conversation about that. So this, like, just nodding.
I just also want to add that when you said the 52%, and I was like, hallelujah, give me the 48%, because that is good, right? So there's a whole other group of people that do want to work in person, and I was also thinking that it's also about boundaries, because being a place that people do have to show up at our places, that what I try to say to my team is, we want you to come and work here, and when you're not here, we don't want you to work. And I think we have to start being more thoughtful about those boundaries that we're setting, so that when people aren't present with us, that they can do the other things that are important pieces of their lives, which we always haven't been so great about culturally at Jay's. Let's continue on the recruitment piece for a little bit, which is, we leaned into the conversation related to the passive workforce and then the people that are actively searching for jobs. Many people in this room, I've had lots of conversations with people, have talked about, hiring a search firm to help them find, new members of their senior team. And that's lovely if you're sitting in a space where you can afford that. For those of you that wouldn't choose that, or for those of you that couldn't even if you wanted to, there's a lot of mechanisms by tapping into the passive workforce that I think is a really important piece of the way that we have to think about recruiting. Ron Clark, as he jumped on one of the chairs yesterday, mentioned this, which was the idea that you actually have to recruit people. If you're sitting back and waiting for people to apply, and the dynamic nature of the workforce, that's not happening anymore. So I'd love for you to share how you've tapped into the passive workforce, how that's actually a relatively easy thing to do via using LinkedIn, and this isn't a commercial for Dave, but it's true. And Golly, how you see that translating into the way people have actually been promoted and uplifted.
So I'll jump in first. I think we've done some of the more traditional and a lot lately more non-traditional things to tap into those networks. And I'll give you a funny story first. So posted a data processor role, LinkedIn, showed up there. Watching it through our applicant tracking system, 10, 15 people applied, day one. Day two, the numbers had increased to like 400, 500 applicants for this very, basic role. It was a hybrid role. It could be virtual. It was a situation where the core competencies were pretty basic. We weren't really asking for a whole lot, but we were wondering, why is this a popular role? This is very interesting. Turns out there's a TikTok influencer who picked up the job and talked about it on her TikTok. I don't use TikTok. I'm Jen.
He's lying. I've totally checked out his profile. We're gonna do a dance.
I don't even know how to get on it.
We're gonna do a dance. Don't worry.
My millennials, boys at home, are the ones who are like, Dad, TikTok. I don't know TikTok. So she had promoted this job, and all of a sudden we had all these people driving traffic to our careers site. TikTok is not part of my recruiting strategy. Perhaps it should be, and we're working on that as we speak. We did not have to pay for that. That was free advertising, right? That was just an influencer who picked it up. I bring it up to say, we're working to meet people where they're at in order to essentially try and get different results. Yes, we are using LinkedIn. I posted a role on LinkedIn earlier this week, and in 4 hours I had 117 app job resumes. for a contract role. We're using that as well, but really just trying to think outside of the box. Thinking about how do we make Coke employees evangelists of all the things that we're doing. I think about your camps, I think about your lifeguards, I think about some of your workers. Those are the best folks to go back out and share the experience that they've had in order to drive traffic or start to build pipeline for the next generation of folks that are coming. These are things we wouldn't have thought about before because we could just post and pray, Post and wait and see what shows up and then mine through that and wash, rinse, and repeat. But it's such a different market out there that we're having to think differently. And again, those are just some very quick things that we're doing. Clearly, I can go into a lot more and have some more conversations around some of those things, but our approach has really been to think outside of the box to try and meet the different needs of this demographic.
Yeah, the idea of passive versus active, very relevant, has been for 10 plus years now. I think what's interesting is that, show of hands, how many of you have full-time recruiters who work at your J's? Full-time recruiters. This is the mindset shift, by the way, because every single hand should be up. Every single one of your employees is also a full-time recruiter. They are brand ambassadors and full-time recruiters for the JCC, including every single person in this room. So another interesting thing, when you reach out to, when a recruiter, someone with the title recruiter, reaches out to somebody on LinkedIn to say, hey, we have a job, thought you might be interested based on your background, blah, 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 they get typically a 13% response rate. When the actual stakeholder or the business manager sends that same exact message, they get closer to a 45 to 50% response rate on that job, which makes you all extremely powerful in the game of recruitment. They want to hear from you. They want to hear from the person who they are going to be working for, who's running the organization. And it's because people are looking for not only purpose-driven, mission-driven, value-driven organizations, they're looking for those same exact things from the people they're going to be working for, those same exact traits. So they want to understand your thoughts on leadership, how you think about running an organization, how you think about internal mobility, what career development looks like, what upskilling looks like directly from you. Your chances of conversion are just so much higher when it comes from the person owning the business. And that, again, that's you, those are your direct reports, those are your managers in the business.
Yeah, incredible. I want to go amen, amen. 3 other things. One, in terms of every one of your employees being basically, a recruiter in itself, what we see is that Jewish organizations' net promoter score, the would you recommend your organization as a great place to work, are very low. We're about 15 points behind the benchmark. Now that means that we have an opportunity to have our employees really drink the Kool-Aid in a way that enables them to then go out and say, hey, there's something open in my organization, why don't you apply? Or you know what, I'll pass over your resume. So that's the first thing. The second thing, in terms of post and pray, I love that. And what we see is that because we don't have recruiters and because we don't have it, we're in many ways, there's a capacity issue within the nonprofit sector in general. What we end up doing is posting and praying. And when there was more of an employer-driven type of market, that worked, and we would maybe get a trickle. Now it's just dry in many ways, unless you're very, very, somehow the position, maybe it's virtual or whatnot. This is where we've seen a lot of success from colleagues like you who treat recruitment like donor cultivation. It's the same type of thing. It's being able to understand who's in the pipeline. And this is where, to your point also, Rob, camps are leadership factories. This room is proof. You all are sitting, and I think, Jerome, you gestured to this in your keynote yesterday. You all are sitting on incredible, incredible people who understand the value, who understand how the mission in ways that are really, really born into their DNA at a very formative time. Again, I don't have to tell you all. And these are the times, especially with pandemic epiphanies, when there could be an openness, especially if they're actively looking. That's the second thing. The third is there is a way in which you can describe, really show the kind of flexibility and transparency when you're actually talking about the different ways in which you want to bring people in. So we actually developed a template, and if anyone is interested, of just an FAQ document of let me give you an illustration of what this position actually means, what you need in order to be successful, what your first 60 days will look like, 90 days look like. That has been tremendously helpful. That, along with videos, I mean, apropos of TikTok, showing don't tell, basically, in terms of positions. Yeah.
Amazing. I also just wanted to mention a couple other things from tapping into the passive workforce from my own experience. Golly mentioned that 2/3 of our workforce is white. This is a real opportunity for us to think differently in the DEI space about actively recruiting the people that you want to show up to provide some level of diversity that is more reflective of our Jewish community as it continues to become more diverse. This is a wonderful way to be really thoughtful about that. In addition, for those of my male colleagues in the room, I promise I didn't prompt Golly to mention that our workforce is 80% women, and there's a lot more of you here than there are of me. And so that the idea of actively looking to find ways to recruit women into the space and think about them in leadership roles really can be done from a really thoughtful passive workforce in a way that you really couldn't when people just apply for the roles. So there's a deep part of intentionality, and I think we've been super successful in finding amazing people. Also, I will say, reflective in the statistics that Golly provided for us, that 60% of the people that work for us are of another faith or no faith. And some of the barriers to entry when you post and pray is not the Hebrew, although it is the Hebrew, is that the fact that people who are of other faith and no faith don't always know that they could work at the J. So tapping into the passive workforce really allows you to be able to recruit and express without having to post on your job. You know, even when you make equity statements about anyone who can apply here, they think that means that anybody that's Jewish can apply there. So it gives you an opportunity for outreach in that way. Okay, we're gonna shift focus for a little bit to, let's start with some staff engagement, okay? What have you seen in your work and what have you applied that really elevates satisfaction in terms of employees? You know, Taco Tuesday, I'm hoping we can get beyond that. But like, what is it that you feel like, particularly in our space and well beyond our space, that really speaks to people? Although Taco Tuesday's good.
I'm happy to take the first crack at this. So every year we do an analysis of what are the top drivers, as I mentioned, of engagement and recruitment, or retention, excuse me. And every year we're surprised that one, salary is not on there. And every year I ask my team, are you sure? Let's crunch the numbers. And two, that three of the factors are the same. And they have to do with belonging. I feel like I belong in my organization. So Rob, you sort of mentioned, can I bring my full self to work? Is there psychological safety? Can I actually say what I mean and be okay with it? That kind of thing. Well-being. This is for 3 years running, by the way. This isn't just like, we're all pandemically, strapped or whatnot. Well-being, I believe my organization cares about my well-being, so care and concern of employees. And the third's confidence in leadership, which again, we mentioned has to do with has to do with a lot, but one of the key factors is communication. Do I know where we're going, and do I trust, the captain of the ship to steer us in the direction where I want to go? And so when we look at engagement and retention, those three factors are really our guides. So what do we say when we look at belonging? This is where I'm going to look at LinkedIn Talent Solutions, because you guys have done amazing work around this, and there's probably new ones that you can talk about. But that's really about being able to be called out in a good way, appreciated for good work. So doing that. And it's in many ways leading with a culture of empathy, being able to really bring that into the workplace in a way that enables somebody to bring their full self to work, and to also be feeling like they're going to be able to be psychologically safe in an environment, and also creative. I mean, that's part of what we need. So when we look at recruitment or retention and engagement, in many ways they speak the same language. And there are specific things, certainly in terms of retention, folks are hungering to be motivated to do their best work and advance within their organizations. And what we see is that generally in the Jewish nonprofit sector, people like their managers, but their managers don't make them better. And that is an amazing opportunity to be able to marry not only I respect you as an individual, but I respect you so much that I'm going to give you the feedback to be able to actually stretch and grow. And that's where we see also an untapped opportunity. I will say one other thing that I was kind of joking with Dave, that one of the biggest ahas for me when I first came to Leading Edge, or we began this process, was that the Jewish nonprofit sector, Jewish employees, use Facebook more than LinkedIn. That's kind of an oi, yeah.
Yeah,
Because we operate like a family business industry, but we're not. And yet, you all know how dicey it gets when there are personal, professional overlays and you have to put somebody on a performance improvement plan that's going to bar mitzvah your kid the next day. And so even there, just thinking about the different processes and boundaries, I think, as you put it, is very important.
So before, I've done a terrible job of managing the clock. Sorry, I'm not good at the managing time thing. So now, you are going to turn to your table. We're going to switch to this slide with the questions. Have a quick conversation with your group to think, is there anything about what we said besides the 48% of people that want to work in person, because that was exciting, that excites you? What challenges did you hear? And from this conversation, what would you like to bring back to your Jay to see that you can do? So go ahead, and then if there's more questions to formulate back to us, please write it on a note card, and the fabulous Mark Young and his team will collect. And please make sure they're appropriate. Thank you. Okay, we have 3 questions. Good luck trying to get to all of it. We're going to try this. Okay, ready? With publishing salary ranges on job postings, does that change the applicant pool from what you have seen? Thank you for that question.
No.
No.
Nope.
Okay, quick. That was good. Would anyone like to elaborate?
I'll jump in. I mean, maybe
not. We can move on. We have more.
Let's be real. It's a necessary evil. We do it. And I think those who are going to apply anyways. A lot of folks just want to talk to someone and use the art of negotiation to see if they can, get more or figure out to be on the higher end of the range that's published. So I don't think it's necessarily caused people not to apply because they don't like the salary. I think folks like the challenge. Give me the opportunity to get you on the phone and tell you why I'm worth more.
I also want to mention that you should not be mad when people try to negotiate with you. Don't be mad. You should be thrilled. Because if it were you sitting on the other side of a table when you were maybe a little less seasoned version of yourself, you probably would have negotiated with you. So if you want people that have leadership potential, you want them to stretch the limits, you want them to push, and so don't be mad. Okay, next question. How do you get your leadership aligned to be the solution, underline, to creating a best-in-class JCC if they're demoralized? How do you get them to lead the change? And if you can answer this one, you will be anointed with some sort of crown.
Okay, I'm happy
to
take a crack. So there are a lot of questions, obviously, very loaded, which we can unpack probably over the next hour in therapy, et cetera. I will say this, it's very real, especially in the JCC movement. You all were the first wave of pandemic craziness, really, and dramatically so. So it's not surprising that your folks, and I don't know if these folks started less than 2 years ago and that's not germane, and if that's the case, then there's something wrong with your culture, because somebody who's been there for 2 years and feels demoralized, that's the half-life usually is like 18 months, and then the dip starts, so that's sort of a flag. I will say that there are ways that we're seeing organizations trying to be creative and giving people an opportunity to take vacations, breathers, a real break, not being on vacation but also on Zoom, which we know is one of the things that is sort of hinted at or in some way forced on organizations. So it strikes me that underlying this is a certain level of exhaustion, which we know that burnout is very real, and certainly again in the JCC movement, I could see that being, 10x even more. So looking at that and thinking about, are there ways in which you can acknowledge, because as my wife likes to say, naming the feeling is like 50% of the healing, right? Like that's part of it. And then seeing like what are the ways in which in micro and potentially in macro ways you can actually start shifting that. But that is a long-winded way of saying that's a loaded question and actually indicative of a very, very CEO question of like, give me the 5-bullet answer to something that's super adaptive. This is not an overnight, take this pill and then, within 30 days, something gets better. This is a process, and would be happy to talk with whoever after if it's helpful.
Great. I think this ties a little bit into the question that was just asked, so if it's too much of the same, we can put it out there and choose to skip it or whatever. Employees, to use your statistic, are 15% less likely to suggest and recommend working at a Jewish nonprofit, and I'm assuming the J falls into that category as well. Maybe it's even worse, who knows. Can you unpack a little bit more about what are the elements of what they're saying of why that might be true?
Sure. So this is the number one question having to do with a retention driver. So organizations, what we did is basically a gap analysis. We looked at the employees who say, I'm going to stay at my organization for more than 2 years, and the employees who said, I'm going to leave my organization within the next 12 months. And we were like, wait a second, what do those who said that they're staying have that those who say they're leaving at the first chance they get don't have? And there were 5 things. The first was, it's really pride in the organization. I don't feel like this is a great place to work. And that's really the heart of a net promoter score. Okay, so let's unpack that. The next thing was confidence in leadership. The next thing was well-being. My organization has care and concern and cares about my well-being. The next thing had to be belonging. And the last thing had to do with communications. Two-way, there's honest and open two-way communications. That's why.
Okay, so in saying that, this ties deeply, and I think that we could speak across sectors with this specifically, which is, what is the role of the people in this room to change that? So in other words, directly from leadership, what do we need to be doing differently to influence that, and where have you seen either the expression of values, the transparency, or whatever, really facilitate change across sectors? Dave, Rob?
I can get a start with a few thoughts. Every CEO we talk to at LinkedIn, across the board, and it's so beautiful because it plays directly into our value proposition, says the same thing. Whether it is on stage giving a keynote address or in their public filings, at some point, every CEO says, and our people are our number one asset. And then we ask the question, what does that mean? How do you deliver on that? And what we find is that like a tremendous amount of time being put into things which are also really important, like sales, marketing, in this world, donor relationships. But when you unpack like what do people being your number one asset actually mean, a lot falls flat. So one thing that we do when we talk about with our clients is the idea of, if people are your number one asset, what is the employee value proposition that you are promising? What's the promise you are delivering, you are making to your employees on day one when they start your organization? And then how are you and your direct reports holding yourselves accountable to that promise? And that's an ongoing conversation. That's actually like a recurring meeting for most people who are doing this well. There is a monthly talent meeting where we are coming back to the promise we are making to our employees. How are we delivering on that? How do we continue to hold ourselves accountable?
It's amazing. Thank you.
I won't pile on too much, just to say ditto. James Quincy, our CEO, recently pushed something out to all of us, just kind of a little bit of a reset to acknowledge what the value proposition was and really drive it home. A lot of that, in addition to the town hall meetings and other things that we're having, just to make sure that we are aligned to the purpose and everyone's kind of on the same page with that. I mean, nothing out of the ordinary. Just consistency in terms of the communication and the messaging such that it stays top of mind frequently.
Great. This is like for the purpose of our conversations and talking about thinking about well-being and these other elements of like, I like to say not only are our people our biggest asset, but they're also our product, because our product is building community. And we talk about all of the needs of the community and how mental health has become such a huge thing and whatever. And then I started looking at what were our benefits related to their access to mental health support that they needed, and it sucks. It's terrible. So again, as we start sharing the values of what we believe we need to build community successfully, particularly in this moment, that has to also be directly translated into the way we view compensation, the way we express values, the way that we draw boundaries, and it's not just about are we paying them the market rate for whatever. There are a lot of intangibles about our place that make it really different. I'd like to go back to, Rob, something that you mentioned earlier, which is the 90-day task. The idea that there's somebody in the organization that really sees a future for themselves, and yet maybe there's not a direct path to get there, and you've given them a special assignment. Tell me a little bit more how that's worked, and if y'all want to jump into the conversation, and I'll add a couple.
Works extremely well. I mean, of course, I've had several opportunities with different companies, and one of the biggest complaints is I don't know how to get to my next move. That role doesn't exist for me. I have to be in my role for 100 years before I can move. At Coke, just a lot of emphasis on professional development through what we're calling our Thrive. And the opportunity is that, look, if you were in marketing and you want to go do a stint in product engineering or something like that, you can apply for something if it exists, and you can go try it out. The cool thing about it is if you go and find out that you love it, great. If you go and find out that never in life do you ever want to hear about that again, party on. It exists. It's totally fine. You get to go back to your job as you were doing it. What it does is just gives people hope and gives them the opportunity to explore and to upskill and to make sure that they are adding to their toolkit such that they can be successful in their journey. And it's been very well received. There are some short-term assignments that are currently available, others that will come, but folks love it.
Yeah. Dave?
Yeah, I love all the words that you're using because they're not just buzzwords, they're super important. So like one term worth getting familiar with is the idea of internal mobility. Internal mobility, super important, and having a talent strategy around that. So we know that an employee who starts day one and then goes through to, you shared like the half-life is 18 months. Once they're at year 3 and they have not made an internal move does not mean promotion. This could be a lateral move as well. If they have not made an internal move by the beginning of year 3, the chances of them staying on for that year is about 43%. So when you think about when you're sitting in your talent meetings and you're talking about people, you want to start by talking about like who are your high potential people? Who are your most critical people assets, and what is their career development plan or their individual development plan to make sure that when we hit that 3-year mark, we're not scrambling, but we actually have a plan in place for our most high potential people. I think that's super critical. You brought up upskilling as well. And you've heard all of us say that like this is not about compensation or benefits, both super important. Skills are actually like the most important currency right now in terms of what professionals are looking for, specifically Gen Z, who's gonna make up 27% of the workforce by 2025. With skills being the new currency, and you think about your employee value proposition, you really want to think through what are the skills that your people are going to acquire during their time at JCC. Because we all need to acknowledge, look around the room, and even with the people that we're interviewing, and acknowledge the fact that like there's a 99% chance that they are going to find another job at some point in their career somewhere else. Your employee value proposition has to be about what are the skills, what are the learnings, what are they going to acquire while they are a part of your organization that's going to develop them as a professional. That's a beautiful conversation to have and like an even better thing to deliver on. Upskilling, internal mobility, great retention tools, and good for everyone's long-term careers.
Can I just affirm that?
Please.
So what we've found, and I think the literature all over the place says, an internal hire is going to outperform an external hire every time. And yet we...
Say that again, please.
An internal hire is going to outperform an external hire. I mean, it tracks, right? It's a lot cheaper to retain a customer, let's say, than to acquire a new one. Same sort of idea. That's the first thing that I just want to lay out here. The second has to do with the skills and competencies. As it relates to recruitment, one of the things that we've seen organizations, Jewish organizations, be very creative with is around looking at some of the skills that are maybe not traditional but needed in certain roles and then filling in around the edges. So for example, you need somebody to build relationships, look to a political campaign or someone who's worked in the administration or on the Hill or what have you, who is now out of a job because there's natural churn happening there and they can potentially go there. The
Jesse
other
Reisman,
classes,
are you paying attention?
yes.
'Cause that was you, my friend.
Yeah. The others, lawyers. Lawyers. How many lawyers do we know that like their job?
None.
Right? Right? No, but they're incredible communicators, whether it's written or verbal, and that can be translated into so many things, especially around development, that kind of stuff. So just thinking about those types of things as well, because skills are super important. So thinking about those roles, we've seen a lot of success with that.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that we call these experiments at my JCC, where we, on purpose, give it that language so that if it blows up, everyone would just expect that that would happen. So we give, team members stretch assignments. Maybe it's 30 days, maybe it's 60 days, whatever. It helps me not only identify the opportunity and show them maybe even the gaps in their skill set and what competencies they still need to develop to get to the place that they would like to go. It also has helped me identify that maybe the person that's their supervisor is not going to be the person that's going to get them to the next place of where they need to go. These stretch assignments have been critical for us to be able to really pull the pieces together and understand. Dave, I love what you said about the idea that chances are somebody's going to go and get a job like you did when you exited the JCC world. And what I would say, and golly, it didn't pay me to say this, but I feel it's our responsibility, knowing that we are the largest employer of the workforce in the Jewish world, is that our responsibility is actually to create our Jewish community in this way. In that we're raising a whole bunch of employees that if the goal is that they would stay in the Jewish world, that should be our goal. And I often say to my team, if you're going to leave, as long as you're going to another Jewish world, I'm so happy for you. And if you go to the corporate side, if you would have worked for me, Dave, I would have ripped a black cloth and said Kaddish for you. You would have been dead to me. No, I'm just joking. Just joking. I really think that it's so important that we view our work as bigger than the J, because it is. And if they have the passion for this work in all of the places, when you have sprinkles of J people all over in organizations around your community, it makes collaboration so much easier. In order to do what we need to do next, you need those people in those spots to help you get there. So start thinking about the whole ecosystem, not just our little coral reef. The last thing before we go to thank yous I wanted to mention was the best stretch assignment that you can give your team is JCC Maccabi. I swear to you, Sam Cohen didn't even invite me to do this, but it's true. All of you that have been involved with hosting JCC Maccabi, raise your hand. How much did you learn about your team and what they were capable of and the things that they could do and the leadership in places that you did not know and you did not see? Because when you do something that is outside of the realm of what you normally do, it shakes loose a whole bunch of parts that either need to be screwed back on and be tight, or allows you to see things in totally different ways. I will tell you that the woman that was the games director in 2022 is now the chief development officer for Upstart, and the person that was the assistant director of the games is now the executive director of a synagogue in my community. Neither of them at the J, both of them are in the Jewish world, which means they're still in my good graces, and they've grown to a place that I didn't have that upward mobility for them. But the games provided them with the skills that they needed to get to the next place. So again, I know you think this is like an advertisement, which it is, and you should do it, because it not only benefits your community, but it benefits your internal community for them to see a future. Thank you, Dave, Golly, and Rob. This was a fabulous conversation. For those of you who asked very specific LinkedIn questions, I reserved them on purpose because Dave is so gracious to give 30 more minutes of his time. If you're lucky enough to get close to him to ask him the questions directly, amazing. But what's even better is you can connect with him on LinkedIn and ask him the question directly, and you will get his individual attention because that's how that works. And by the way, don't do it via Facebook because that is upsetting. Thank you for your time and attention. And for the first time ever, Jordan, you're a witness. We are done before the time is over. Yes, you are welcome.